Instead, I can make the same point by asking a question. And in that case, I'd say, tell me, where are you getting your moral standard that you're judging God by? Now the ball's in his court. I've asked a question. It's his job to answer. But the question goes right to the weakness of the view.
Greg, you were talking about the opportunities that we have when someone contradicts their own worldview to exploit that mistake.
Right.
How do you do that in a polite way?
Okay. I have found a life-changing way to do that. When I say life-changing, over the last 15 or 20 years, this has absolutely transformed the way I engage people. And what I do is I use questions. Now, I pause there because that doesn't sound very profound, but it's amazing how effective it can be if we get into the habit of it. We can use questions to gather more information. People make claims against Christianity, okay? Well, then I want to say, well, help me understand that. What do you mean by that? The Bible's been changed over the years. Well, explain that process to me. How did that happen? Tell it to me. And I want them to tell me more about their objection. Okay, now this sounds counterproductive maybe for many Christians. Like, I don't want to hear more of the objection. But I found that when people speak more about the objection, they end up realizing that maybe their objection isn't as powerful as they thought. Another thing that I want to do is if a person is making their point against Christianity, the impulse of a lot of Christians, especially more aggressive ones who've had some training in Christian defenses, is to give the reasons why they're wrong. But what we've done then is we've taken the responsibility, the burden of proof on ourselves. And if another person makes a claim against Christianity, there is no God, or the Bible's been changed, or Jesus never existed, or we evolved, etc., etc., it is their job to defend their claim before it's my job to refute it. So I'm going to ask another question. Okay, I understand your view, because I've drawn them out a little bit with the first question. What do you mean by that? Now I want to know, how is it that they came to that conclusion? Tell me a little bit about the reasons why you think that's so. Now again, I'm not advancing my view yet, so how am I making progress? Kirk, people will be absolutely stunned by using two questions. What do you mean by that? And drawing people out to get more information and asking for the reasons for their conclusions. In different ways you can ask that. You'll be stunned at how much progress they're going to make. Because lots of times people don't have good reasons for their views, and when or any at all. And sometimes when they are asked to articulate it, they don't know where to go. Okay, I call it the Simon and Garfunkel moment, because these are the guys who wrote the song back in 1966, I'm dating myself, called The Sounds of Silence. And that's what you get in a moment like that. So those are like two steps where there's no pressure on the Christian at all. And what the Christian is doing is gathering two different types of information in the conversation. So if you were the one who opposed me in a particular view, I'd want to get as much information from you as I could, Kirk, on what your opposition was and why you think your opposition is legitimate. Okay? Notice I'm not in the deep end of the pool here. I'm ankle deep. I'm not taking any pressure because I'm not making any claims yet. Okay? The third step is very similar, but it's an advanced step. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions to make a point. So let's go back to our atheist that we were talking about, who's critiquing God, the God of the Bible, as immoral. All right? Now I know, and I explained this point earlier, that the atheist in his worldview has no sufficient grounding or foundation to make a moral charge against God. Because if it's just molecules in motion, there's no morality.
And as you like to say, he's got his feet firmly planted in midair.
That's right, exactly right, exactly. And so I could just say, you can't claim God as evil because there's no grounding for evil in your world. You don't believe in good and bad and evil and etc. in your worldview. But see, I'd just be arguing with him. Instead, I can make the same point by asking a question. And in that case, I'd say, tell me, where are you getting your moral standard that you're judging God by? Now the ball's in his court. I've asked a question. It's his job to answer. But the question goes right to the weakness of the view. Now, of course, you need to see the weakness. okay? And I do talk about that a lot in the tactics book, and I'm actually writing another book to follow up on the tactics franchise, so to speak, that gives more information about that kind of thing to help people to ask the questions to exploit the weaknesses. But notice, though, that these are all questions. Notice that I can be completely relaxed. I can have a conversation with somebody in a relaxed manner. I'm not banging heads with them. I'm not mad at them. I'm not getting into fights. I'm very passively defending my turf by asking questions about the other person's view.
Yeah.
So this is the tactical approach that has changed everything for me. And it's why so many people who have read the book Tactics, A Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions, have said to me, this book has changed my life.
Greg, the Bible talks a lot about discernment, and we need to have it.
Right.
Can you explain what is discernment and why is it so important?
Well, discernment is when you look at a circumstance and you try to figure out what the truth is regarding that. Okay, now when the Bible talks about discernment, generally it's talking about spiritual truth. In fact, Jesus mentions to the Jews, he said, you can kind of discern the signs of the weather, but you can't discern the signs of the times.
Yeah.
You don't get what's going on here in terms of the flow of ideas and spiritual truth, okay? Now, I mentioned earlier that there are two different ways that we know truth. One of them is through our natural faculties, and other things we have to be told. And in God's case, God has to tell us most of the things that are important. And so this takes us back to Scripture, all right? So, common sense notion from a Christian, how do you discern truth? You use Scripture. But using Scripture is not always that easy because characteristically, Christians have bad habits when they go to the text. So let me point out something in 2 Timothy chapter 3. This is the verse in verse 16 where it says, all Scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, training, etc. Okay? Notice the word Scripture is the Greek word graphe. That means the writings. All the writings are inspired. It's not the ideas that we're thinking of when we're reading the writings. It's not the stuff we find between the lines, so to speak. It's not what we're getting out of the spiritual ether while we're reading Scripture. It's the words themselves that communicate the truth. This is why we are to attend in Scripture to the words in relationship to each other in paragraphs. I have a principle that we have at Stand to Reason. We've said it many, many times, and we use it because it's so effective. And the principle is never read a Bible verse, okay? Huh?
Yeah,
Throw the whole thing out? No, what it means is if you want to know what a verse means, you can't just read a verse, you have to read at least a paragraph or more, to get the meaning. If somebody tuned into the show and heard one line from our discussion, they'd have no idea what we were talking about. They'd likely get it wrong. But if they're listening to the discussion, then they're going to see the context of the remarks, and it's less likely that they're going to misunderstand what we're talking about.